my father told me that my cousin was going to Ohio State. We were born the same day. We were close. He said, "That's where you're going if you want me to pay." So off I went to Columbus. But Ohio State was wonderful. I attended Ohio State from 1969 to 1972 when I graduated in 72 and went off to law school, to Dickinson Law School. My days in Columbus were wonderful, although, quite exciting. And, it reminds me somewhat of what goes on today. My first year at Ohio State, we had a lot of shootings, protests over the Vietnam War.
Mhm.
Um, we probably, most of you know about Kent State, but Ohio State, had similar issues. The Black Panthers were acting like snipers on roofs. National
Wow.
Guard had instructions, you see groups of 10 or more and tear gas them. Didn't matter if you're coming out of class. You'd
Wow.
turn around, people were running. Exciting days, and you know, today when you look at some of what goes on college campuses, I can't help but think about my own past. But
Mm, I'm
Ohio
sure.
State was exciting. Uh, I went through in 3 years, probably a little less than 3 years, because I knew that I always wanted to be a lawyer and that was going to be my career. And so I wanted to get through my school and get out into the real world and, try and fight the good fight to represent clients. And I am a practicing lawyer. I was admitted in 1975. And my career path has kind of changed over the years. So, not to get into a lot of detail, but I started as a trial lawyer.
Mhm.
And most of the cases that I handled were litigation. And a lot of them were representing consumers and people who were injured from different types of situations, whether it be car accidents, slip and falls, products liability, drug liability, um, trying to handle some environmental cases, trying to represent the people that needed to be protected. And along with doing that, I had an interest in sports and I tried to see what I could do to combine the two. So most of what I do is litigation, but my career path, kind of got, I wouldn't say sidetracked because it became a main feature. But I had been involved in the thoroughbred racing industry for many years, and I was able to take those skills and translate them into another path for me. So I own thoroughbred racehorses. I race them. I continue to race them at this point in time, but I started to do work for the Horsemen's Organization here in New Jersey and nationally. And I went through different phases where I was their legislative counsel, their general counsel, um, ended up being their president for 2 terms, got involved in issues that may be of interest to your audience,
Mhm.
got involved in a lot of politics and doing a lot of lobbying and trying to get legislation passed to benefit not only my horse constituency, but the legal profession. So the trial lawyers, had the same path. They were trying to promote legislation that would protect consumers. And I took those skills that I was using in trial law to the racetrack and the horse industry to try and improve things for the horse industry. I was appointed by 2 governors to be the chairman of the New Jersey Racing Commission. And I found myself in 2011 to be in a strange spot. I thought I could be effective as the chairman of the Racing Commission, helping the racing industry, only to find that the governor who appointed me decided that he was going to form a commission called the Hansen Commission, which recommended that they close racing in the state.
I remember
So
that.
the state of New Jersey was losing $17.5 million a year on racing. They were operating the business since 1986. And in 2011, it was either privatize it or we're closing. So Jeff Garral up at the Meadowlands, so I know that you know,
Mhm.
Jeff took over the Meadowlands, which is harness racing. And the deal that they had for someone to take over thoroughbred racing fell apart, and Monmouth Park was about to close. The governor asked me at that point in time, with the blessing of the Attorney General, to come off the Racing Commission and to lead the horsemen in trying to save an industry in New Jersey, racing and breeding here in New Jersey, which over the years was an affluent industry, but had fallen on hard times.
Mhm.
There was a point in time when, from the gambling dollar, we were at, you couldn't bet on anything else.
Right.
But over the years, with casino industry coming in and the lottery and, all sorts of other gaming that you could, get involved in, racetracks fell on hard time.
Right.
So in 2012, I, with the horsemen, signed a lease with the state to take over the racetrack, only to find that, and I'm not making this political, but the governor decided no more subsidies, no more help from the state. You're either going to survive on your own, you have your own destiny available to you. Don't talk to me about the expansion of casino gaming because it's not going to happen. But the one thing that Governor Christie did do was he said, you want to try sports betting? Go ahead and run with the ball.
Mhm.
So that's really where the story should start, in terms of what I think would interest your audience. So
Mhm.
New Jersey, with my efforts and some of the legislators who favored sports, uh, in particular, Senator Lesniak, who helped lead the charge, helped me by permitting me to help draft legislation in New Jersey. And I probably should step back for a minute to say that at that point in time, sports betting was illegal in this country based upon PASPA, which was the law that prevented you from engaging in sports betting unless you were a state that engaged in it prior to the law being passed, which basically was Nevada.
Right.
You had three other states that were on the fringe, that being Delaware, who did some parlays, and Oregon and Montana, who really had nothing that existed in it. But nobody else was permitted to engage in sports betting. And in 1999, Congress did a study, and they learned that this illegal sports betting market, we're talking bookies, the
Mhm.
mob, offshore companies, they were generating 399 billion a year in illegal bets.
That's incredible.
And so we decided to, in New Jersey, try and fight the fact that Nevada could do this, but we could not. And although it sounded simple at the time, it was far from simple. When I undertook the challenge, this is kind of what it looked like. So interviewed a bunch of sports betting companies, decided to partner with a company called William Hill, who was a old sports book, globally. We decided we were going to undertake the challenge to overturn PASPA. We passed a law in New Jersey that made it legal in New Jersey to engage in sports betting, regulated by our regulators that regulate gaming. And the problem was that it was illegal on a federal level. So I engaged counsel to assist me, even though I am counsel myself and participated primarily throughout the litigation. And initially I thought, okay, I'm going to litigate this for a year or two, and we're going to have sports betting, and it's going to save the track and generate revenue, because there was no other revenue aside from the potential of sports betting. The track was losing a lot of money.
Mm.
And, 8 years later, we finally won. And there's a journey to talk about, in terms of how all that happened. But I think it starts with trying to paint this picture for you.
Absolutely.
So here I am
Right.
about to engage in trying to get sports betting legal in New Jersey. And, I've been involved with politicians and politics for a long time. So I called upon one of my, colleagues who happened to be a U.S. congressman, Congressman Pallone. And I explained to him what we're about to do. And he said, fine, I'll have my people look into this for you. And he sends me a letter and he says, if you take the first bet, these are the 6 different ways you can go to jail. And no 2 ways about it. So my wife was kind. She said, I'll visit you. But the object was, how do we get a court to say this is legal so that we don't take that bet and risk going to jail?
Mhm.
So I guess, the best way to describe it is I start beating my chest and saying we're going to start taking bets and kind of daring the leagues to stop us. So at that point in time, the people that could enforce stopping someone from taking bets were the leagues. And in addition to that, the Justice Department.
Mhm.
So the leagues decided to file a suit seeking an injunction, saying this violates federal law. You can't do this. And not to get ahead of myself, but when you are handling litigation, the plan is what's the end result that you're trying to get to and what's the roadmap to get there. So the plan when the leagues filed the injunction was to listen carefully to what the courts said. And we're in the federal system at that point, Judge Michael Shipp. And he issued an opinion at the district court level, which is the lowest level in the federal courts. And at the district court level, he kind of painted a roadmap. He said it's illegal for you to do this. And I'm going to issue an injunction. And, the leagues took their position. And ultimately, he told us why he felt that this was illegal. So the next thing we did is we went to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. The Circuit Court in New Jersey, the Third Circuit, is comprised of New Jersey as well as some other states around us and the U.S. Virgin Islands. But putting that aside, we went to the Third Circuit. And the leagues kind of took the position with the Justice Department that New Jersey did not do this right. So there are ways that you could do it, but not the way you chose. Because PASPA said that the government cannot encourage, promote, or in any way assist in trying to engage in this activity. And so the court felt that our action, violated the law because the state was giving its blessing, to do this. And the Third Circuit agreed with the district court. At the same time, the Justice Department and the leagues were explaining their position to the courts and saying, we're not saying, there isn't a way to do it. We're saying that New Jersey's law is defective. So when you're trying to promote a result at the end, what do you do next? You write another piece of legislation,
Right.
And that legislation follows what the lower court says. And what we did is we did a repeal of all of the gambling laws in New Jersey, which would have prohibited this type of conduct. So instead of it being conducted under the auspices of state approval, we basically privatized it. We said that the repeal of all the laws now enables us to go forward. So we're about to take bets again in October 2014. We're getting ready to do this, and I'm not going to get into a lot of the more sophisticated issues unless someone asks the question later on. But there are a bunch of laws like the Wire Act, which prevent you from crossing state lines and engaging in gambling, and the Paraphernalia Act and the Travel Act, and a lot of laws that were put into effect back in 1961 by Robert Kennedy, who was the Attorney General at the time. And the purpose of that was to prevent the mob, from engaging in illegal activities. So they kind of federalized the law, because at that point in time, if you're doing something in the state and went across state lines, you lost jurisdiction once you crossed the state line.
Right.
So what ended up happening is that we're back in front of judgeship, and the leagues are saying they can't do this. And judgeship agreed with them. He said, what you really did is you were cute and you repealed the laws, but the places that you're permitting this activity to take place, which is racetracks and casinos, are heavily regulated. And so we think all you really did was skip a beat, and you're still engaging in something that's prohibited by the law. So here we go off again to the Third Circuit. And the Third Circuit Court of Appeals was interesting. So at that point in time, we had one of the judges that sat on the prior case, and the other two judges, you appear in front of three judges, was Governor Rendell's ex-wife and Donald Trump's sister, who were on the bench. And they heard the case, and it was 2-1. They said that we couldn't engage in this activity, that all we really did was create a different way of having state regulation of sports betting. And, the interesting part was that Judge Fuentes, who was a judge that was on the prior Third Circuit case, said, wait a minute, this is what we told them they can do. Now they came back to us and did exactly what we told them. And two of the three, not him, says you can't do it. So as a result of that decision, we filed what's known as a petition for an en banc hearing. En banc means that you're asking the whole court, not just three judges, to weigh in on the case. And we were a little more successful that time. We had 3 votes in our favor, 9 against. But we decided to file a petition to the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court, when they get to that point, they ask the Solicitor General to weigh in. Do you think we should take the case or not? And I should probably say that it's not easy to get to the Supreme Court. Of all the cases that are filed in the country, a handful are selected. And so you really have to be worthy, so to speak, in the Supreme Court's eyes in order to get your case in. And the Justice Department took the position that you don't need to hear the case, because what they've done here is they've created a way that's just not constitutionally flawed, but there are other ways to do it, and we think that they can engage in this activity, just not the way they're trying to do it. So notwithstanding the Solicitor General taking that position, the Supreme Court decided to take the case. And you don't know for sure why they took the case, but I would say that at that point in time, the Supreme Court was 8 justices. Gorsuch was appointed in the interim. He's a big states' rights guy.
Right.
He may or may not have swung the vote. But the long and short of it is we got to the Supreme Court. And in December of 2017, the case was argued in front of the Supreme Court. And there was no question in probably 90% of minds in the room that New Jersey won the case. How we won it, what they would say, there was a little room for debate about
Right.
that, but the leagues continued to press to try and stop us, saying that this would be the ruination of sports and it would be a disaster. And I think, they were claiming integrity issues, but if you think about it, if there's a $400 billion illegal industry, I'm sure they were doing things to try and protect against integrity violations anyway, but they really fought us hard, notwithstanding the fact that today they're making billions based
Right.
upon sports betting becoming legal.
Right.
But in May of the following year, the Supreme Court issued their opinion. New Jersey won the case. And that's not the end of how you get to start sports betting, because then you need enabling legislation in your state. And you need to have a path of whether it's going to be regulated or not, how it's going to be regulated. And about a month later, we took our first bet. Monmouth Park, where, I work in addition to my law firm, Monmouth Park was the first venue to have sports betting. Governor Murphy, at that point in time, he had become governor. So when you're litigating something for 8 years and it's the NCAA versus Christie, the day he's out of office and Governor Murphy comes in, the case is now NCAA versus Murphy. So he
Right.
gets the victory. He got to make the first bet.
There you go.
And we made the first bet during World Cup that year.
Uh-huh.
And, off to the races, so to speak. So
Quite literally. Well,
probably
we have a question here. I was hoping maybe we
Sure.
could engage. So the question from Aaron is, now that in-venue gambling has been legalized in other states, what do you think the leagues and the venues learned from racing specifically? And I'm going to add on to that from your experience as well, from the New Jersey experience.
So I think that most of the states, not all, but most of the states followed our model, in enacting different legislation or constitutional changes to enable them to do this. So New Jersey started, we were first. But today, New Jersey was 2018. Today, I'd say it's close to 40 states within this country that have legalized sports betting in one form or another. And, in addition to, speaking to you today, I teach at Seton Hall Law School in the evenings, and we talk about issues such as, like, how do you do this? How do you get to a point where your state can engage in sports betting? So you have to think, number one, like policy considerations. What do you want it to look like? Brick and mortar, which means in a physical building or online. When we started sports betting, or the fight to get sports betting, we wanted to put people back in the seats at racetracks and casinos. But ultimately, there's a lot of revenue in the online portion.
Right.
So Monmouth Park is probably different. We have a racing venue, so we're probably, initially we were 50-50 on online and brick and mortar. Probably as a result of COVID, it went to 80-20, but statewide, it's 90%. So I think the other states, to answer your question specifically, they looked at the New Jersey model and they looked at the rationale in the court, and they asked themselves, do we need a constitutional referendum, or is it permitted under our Constitution? And then once they get past that question, the question became, what do we want? Do we want brick and mortar? Do we want online? I think there's only one state that I'm aware of right now that lets you do this if you're under 21. I think Kentucky lets you do it at 18.
Okay.
But most states, and it's a dichotomy for us, at the racetrack, because to bet on a horse race, you have to be 18.
Right.
To bet on a sports bet, you need to be 21. So I think all the other states kind of looked at our regulatory process and our DGE, which is the Division of Gaming Enforcement, best in the world. No insult to Nevada, but I think our guys are terrific. But we work closely with Nevada, and a lot of the other states have worked with our regulators in order to advance sports betting in their states. You still have issues that are related to the federal laws. So when you are doing sports betting, it's within your own state. You can't go across state lines. So some from Ohio couldn't bet here in New Jersey unless you physically are here. Or someone from New Jersey, can't bet into your Ohio system.
Right.
But I think that right now we're at 40. I think I could say with some confidence, Utah will never pass this. But I think eventually, 95% of the states will be engaging in sports betting. And then you have a lot of other issues, which I don't want to be exhaustive because it'll take too much time.
Right.
But if you look at the California model, for example, California tried to pass sports betting, but the tribes and the tracks and the operators couldn't get together on a common referendum. So they spent about 600 million trying to get their versions of the bill passed and ended up with nothing. So they don't have sports betting yet.
We have another
Florida,
question actually from Ryan Ruddy, who's wondering
sure.
how the legalization of, and I do want to encourage everybody to submit their questions. We'd love to get your questions answered. So please feel free to submit them in the Q&A. Ryan's asking how the legalization of sports gaming affected the amount wagered on horse racing.
So it's interesting. I think that the horse racing wagering has not suffered as a result of sports betting. In fact, sports betting has the ability to really grow the handle in racing. So in 2018 and 2019, we developed a plan to cross market. So we did certain things. I don't know how much racing background everyone has, but if you talk about a simple bet that's a pick four, where you're picking 4 races, the winners of 4 races, we modified that a little bit. So we did 3 races parlayed into a ball game. And we found that the crossover of people that had never bet on horse races before, was now different, where the people that bet on sports were now betting on horse race and then vice versa. So I think it has the ability in the future to really grow the industry. And right now, whether I like it or not, the horse players are an aging group. And even though most of us in the industry are excited about our sport, it isn't as popular as other sports like football, basketball, baseball. You'd be surprised at some of the things they bet on during COVID, like Russian table tennis, Korean baseball. People want to bet. So, if your sports are shut down, you look for something to bet on, and racing was open. So there was a big influx of betting on racing. And now we're doing things such as fixed odds wagering here in New Jersey, which has the ability to, grow the industry. But right now, like here in New Jersey, which will become public soon, here in New Jersey, we're going to open our market. So right now we have an exclusive operation where you have an ADW, which is an advanced deposit wagering system, or in other words, internet wager.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've been doing that, for 20 years. But now what you're going to do is you're going to see them on the sports books and casinos also. So the future of wagering in this country, if it's not already there, everyone's got a phone. whether it's
Right.
a smartphone, iPhone, whatever you choose to use, and you have apps on it. And the younger demographics are using it even more than perhaps some of the seniors that are not quite familiar with it. But you're going to have 20 times the amount of eyes on your product.
Right.
So right now, like, I was surprised when I saw these numbers, but horse racing, sports wise, is a very small percentage. But you go nationally and look at what they're betting on. I mean, football is the biggest,
Right.
NFL and NCAA football. And then, you talk about something like tennis. There's so many opportunities in tennis, particularly with in play, that's
Mhm.
about 10% of the wagering. So there's no reason why we can't grow horse racing wagering with different gimmicks like cross over events where you can do pick fours and parlay into a ball game. No reason why you can't grow that to 10% also.
Right.
But we initially projected, about 10 billion a year, in wagering here in New Jersey alone. And we kind of hit that number. And throughout the country, it keeps growing and growing and growing. And, I should say that we are very responsible in terms of what we're requiring our operators to do. So we are required by New Jersey law, and I think every state has done this, the integrity aspect. You have to monitor everything. And I get alerts all day long asking me, what's the action you have on this particular event because we hear there might be a fix in. And, by sharing information, you can see betting patterns that may not be appropriate. And the other thing we're very keen on these days, and I think you had this problem in Ohio, and there were some fines handed out, big fines, of sports books or operators that were soliciting college students, that were underage.
Right.
And so they handed out some fines that stopped. But responsible gaming is a very big issue in sports.
And we have actually a question about that from Ashish. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Asking, are there particular aspects of New Jersey betting legislation that attempt to curb addictive behavior, or is that left up to the companies like FanDuel or your traditional brick and mortar casino?
So we are required to have a responsible gaming policy. And yes, I would say FanDuel, Entain, some of the larger companies, are more proactive than others, but you can sign up to be excluded. And I don't handle these cases, but I get a lot of calls from someone who says, typical case, I put myself on the exclusion list and the casino tempted me. They sent me some free bets. They sent me some information saying I could sign up and I could make these wagers. And so I got addicted again and I lost my house. I lost my business, whatever the case may be. And that's strictly illegal. The DG comes down on you very hard for doing that. So most of the books and the regulators are increasing their responsible gaming policies. And we give courses, we give lectures. I'm about to do a boot camp next month, on this type of, engagement and compliance and regulations. But it's very important because it's an addiction, just like any other addiction that can destroy your life. And we are responsible, like in my own place of business, we are partners now because they bought William Hill with Caesars, and Caesars runs the sports book. It's our license. Um, but you can't make a bet. If you try and make a bet and you're underage, you got a major problem. It's a criminal offense. And we find that, which is somewhat interesting, we get these calls. Um, my kid took my credit card, uh, wagered on a game,
Wow.
and I didn't authorize this, so I'm not paying it. And the government explains to them, you're right. If your kid made the wager, you know, you can't be charged for it, but we want to explain to you what's going to happen. You get your refund, but your kid gets arrested. He has a criminal record. He applies to schools or applies for a job down the road, and you really want that. Now, surprisingly enough, some parents want to teach their kid a lesson, but 99% of them pay the credit card bill and don't want their kid to have a problem.
Right. All right. Well,
Then in
we
New
have another
Jersey, which is different from some states, can't bet on a college game.
interesting.
So, most states let you engage, in betting on college games. But New Jersey does not. And I don't want to go into the whole explanation for that, but sometimes you have to make compromises to get legislation passed, particularly when it's unanimous.
Right.
So, you do what, people who have different values, want you to do in order to get your legislation moved forward. And then several years later, they went back in thinking it was a no-brainer to, change it a little bit so you could bet on college, and the voters didn't go for it.
Right.
But most states do permit you to bet on college sports.
And now we have another question. Max is going to ask this one.
Oh yeah, this question from Will O'Malley, and he's asking, just to clarify, is betting on horse racing not available on the major sports betting sites? And if not, where is it available to bet on if the legal age is different?
So right now, if I talk about the major site, we're talking about FanDuel. They probably have 50-60% of the action throughout the country. And FanDuel Racing does permit you to wager on horse racing also. But it wasn't like this, in the past. This is a development in the past year or two. So you can find, I think when I met with the DGE, our New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement, pre-decision, when we were getting ready, we knew we won. Not officially, but the feeling in the room with the Supreme Court was we would be successful. So we were getting ready to open. And they said, do you know what your biggest problem is going to be? And they said, there are 110 illegal sites, that will take your action. And how you going to compete with the illegal sites? So we track everything. If you want to bet with us, you have to open an account. If you're betting over $1,000, everyone's registered, everyone can track the money. We can't let them bet on credit. But a bookie can, and the offshore sites can. And there are people that don't want to pay taxes. So they don't want their action tracked. They want to, bet in a form where they'll take the risk whether they get paid. But they don't want anyone to see their records. So I think that when we, walk down those different roads, horse racing, primarily has been done in legal sites, but I wouldn't say all of it is. And, I think that we have a responsibility. So if someone walks up to the window and they look too young, you need proof. And you need to see their driver's license. And if you're cashing a bet, you need to fill out forms, you need to give social security numbers, you need to pay the tax. And so it becomes something that is policed in-house. And the people who sell the bets, certainly do that. But, I would say that, in my opinion, which may not be 100%, I'm telling you what I think. But I don't think I know one kid that doesn't have phony proof, to get into a bar and drink. So, if they're coming up to us and they've got a driver's license and you ask them a couple of questions and they don't know what year they were born or something of that nature, they make a mistake. But, you can pretty much, we've gotten sophisticated enough to like screen the driver's licenses and figure out what's phony. But if you're not sure, you need to ask for a second form of ID. And it's on us. If we take a bet from someone underage, and you can get caught because, not that it matters to me, we try and do what's right. The fact that you could get caught, but if a parent calls up and says, my kid bet, and this was illegal and you permitted it, then you have to go through some regulatory, hearings and try and, explain why you took the bet. And unfortunately, and I'm not trying to pass moral judgment on people, but parents let their kids bet. So, the parents come to the track and they bring their children. And, sometimes it's tough to see whether someone's 16 or 17 or whether they're over 18. And we need to ask. But the parents aren't shy about it. They'll say to a 5-year-old, who do you like? And, usually I like those colors. I like that name, and the kid doesn't make the bet, the parents make the bet.
Right.
But we're required to, be very careful about these things. And in the
Absolutely.
sports book, it's even worse. In the
I'm-
sports book, they'll come down on you very quickly if you take one of those bets, and you can't even do things like in our facility and in every casino that I know, we have to have a picture of everything that's going on in the sports book. And so you can track, if somebody's doing something inappropriate. And you see a lot of instances where the parent goes to the window, but you have a kid, that's 30 feet away, that the parent's making the bet for the kid. But that's illegal. And we need to charge them. And so, they get it. They, maybe if you went to some, excuse the word, dive, didn't, properly supervise, they wouldn't care as much. But everyone that I know in New Jersey and in the other states, that operate, care very much about this.
Absolutely.
And, we want to do the right thing and we want to prevent underage gambling. But by the same token, sometimes it's difficult to police the parents. Like on another vein at Monmouth Park, we have a picnic area. And it's BYOB in the picnic area. So the parents come in and they carry the chest with beer in it. And first thing you know is they sit down with their family and, they hand the beer to their child
Wow.
who looks overage, but, maybe that person is 19 or 20. And next thing you know, the ABC comes along, who have undercover people watching us. And they ask for proof and, they realize, and it's our problem.
Right.
The fact that the parent brought it in, they're saying you didn't do your job properly.
Well, we have
We
we have a
take these
great
things very
question here
seriously.
from Ashish about that very thing. And Max is going to ask that one about kind of accountability.
Yeah, so from Ashish, he asked, also, this is less related to horse racing, but from a broader industry perspective, are you concerned about the impact that big businessmen getting involved with college athletes has in terms of the integrity of the sport? Or do you think this won't be an issue in the future? And this would be things such as business people offering NIL contracts under the table in exchange for tanking a game or something like that.
So that can open up, a conversation that would take the rest of our time. But let me try and talk about it this way. I am concerned. And I think NCAA sports and the whole college sport, hasn't quite figured it out yet. It's one thing to talk about NILs, but maybe I shouldn't mention names, but I'm going to. Recently, I think it's probably about a year ago, St. John's hired a coach by the name of Rick Pitino. And when he came to St. John's, a guy that I know very well, that spends He's a St. John's graduate. He spends, 30 to $50 million a year buying horses. He sold a company called Vitamin Water, I'm sure most of you are familiar with. And he said, look, I'm going to pay for whatever NILs are necessary to make this team, a contender on the national level. And he has. And I know that Ohio State, coming closer to home, is investing heavily in NILs. I think the last number I saw was about 13 million. And, it may get the kids to stay. But while I'm talking about NILs, I want to, segue into also the transfer portals, because that's all part of this also. And I think this is detrimental to sports. Those that want to engage in it and those that have by force, had to play that game because this is the legal game now, are spending a lot of money to try and convince players not to go into the draft or to come to their school. If I went back 30 years, when I handled some of these cases, the kids couldn't do this. If they were stuck at the school, if they wanted to transfer, they had to sit out for a year. And, was that a good system, a bad system? And I'm not telling you what the answer to this is because we all have our own moral compass. And I think there are going to be a lot of changes, over the next several years, but it's put college athletics at a whole different level. And some people that I talk to, businessmen who probably fit the category of what you're asking, they think it's great. The alumni now don't have to do something illegally. They can legally, pay for these athletes to make their alma mater, successful in the country. But by the same token, when I think about it, and have thought about it over the years, it's unfair to a college athlete, who has a high potential in the pros, and they get hurt and they never get drafted, never get to play. Maybe there's a better system of taking out insurance and, protecting these kids, but we're dealing with kids. And I mean, there's a lot of talk now, even, at every level that I engage in, people are concerned about their children engaging in sports. You want to send your 7-year-old out to play tackle football? When I was growing up, we thought nothing about it.
Right.
But today, maybe they'll have more flag football. But people are, getting more concerned about it. You see, the NFL with all the concussion settlements and all the litigation over that. You have to think twice about whether you want to let your kid engage in athletics at, the kind of levels that they do. So I know young children, and, their parents come in with cases, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 13-year-olds
Mhm.
who need Tommy John surgery because, they've been overworked.
Right.
And, I think sports may never change, but the parents are becoming more aware of this. And it's
Absolutely.
not just the parents that are saying, oh yeah, I need to make my kid, a star athlete. It's a lot of parents that are taking a whole look at steering them in another direction.
Mhm.
I mean, when I was at Ohio State, if you told me that what I'm about to say could possibly happen, I'd say, you must be kidding. But the last time I looked, which is years ago, so I'm sure it's a higher number now, there are 110 Division I schools that are giving full scholarships for people to come and do esports and for people to come and learn video gaming. And, that never existed 30 years ago. And when I looked into this, because it's part of our business plan, esports,
Mhm.
I found the high schools are engaging in esports and they're playing competition with kids in Asia. And you have stadiums there that hold 50,000 people and they're full,
It's
you know,
incredible.
all day long. And, the kind of money that's there, it's, you know, in the billions of what they're
Absolutely.
making. That's going to continue to grow as time goes on.
You're so right. All right. Well, we have, believe it or not, our time is drawing close. So I want to make sure we get all our questions in, and Max has another one for us.
Sure.
Yes, we have a question. It's with the advancement of online betting, is off-track betting still popular? And what would make an off-track betting site different than online / in-app gambling in today's market?
So the internet wagering, the off-track wagering is popular. I don't think people are building as many brick and mortar off-track facilities as they were 10 years ago because it's easier to do it online. But we see our online sport horse racing wagering growing. But now with the advent of most of the books and most of the major operators trying to consolidate sports and racing, where you're going to offer racing on sports online wagering and vice versa. You can't do certain things, like if it's 18 with horse racing, you can't let them bet sports if they're underage. But I think what I was talking about before with merging the two, so if you're permitting instead of kind of a monopoly, having an exclusive in New Jersey for New Jersey bets, which is the name of our online wagering here. And we're about to expand to let all the sports books and ADWs and internet gaming companies that operate in the state have it also. You're now going to see 20 times the amount of eyes that are watching and wagering on these sports. And the challenge for us, which we'll bend over backwards to be strict about, is preventing an 18-year-old from wagering on sports. But they're free to wager on horse racing. And there will be other things that people wager on in the future that I probably haven't even dreamed about yet. So I think it's a growing area. I think the one thing I would tell you for any of you that are interested is there's so many job opportunities now in this sector. There's a need for people in every element. So I find young students and graduates coming into the business that are advancing so quickly because, like in the United States, it's been limited, but overseas, it's been going on forever. So overseas, they come to the United States and they're on a visa, and then the visa expires and they have to go back. So there's really a market here for people that want to get involved in gaming, and there's advancement. And lest I forget, diversity is a big issue in sports also. So the diversity in terms of opportunities for diversity to engage in sports, we see a lot more women, coming into the market. We also find that, with the requirements, that you operate with all your regulatory, there are advancements for accountants, compliance officers, regulators. The whole market has just opened up so much that you can decide to take a job in this sector and advance pretty quickly because they keep opening books all over the country. So while we brought them here in New Jersey, we were the first. People got jobs here, and then the FanDuels of the world or the Caesars, they send them to open other books in other states. So it's such a growth and an opportunity to, really find a new career in something that excites you. Might not be everyone's cup of tea, but if this is something that excites you, think of all the possibilities. And I think, maybe I'm a dinosaur, but the younger people that are coming into the business, they have all sorts of ideas that are exciting. And they're probably better equipped and better able to manipulate all the technology. And, there's so much technology that's involved in this. Um, those of you that are involved, and I don't think we have enough time to talk about this at length, but we're required to use geo-tracking to figure out where people are making the bets. So when New Jersey was doing it and it was illegal in New York, the GG has this big board and it lights up whenever anyone's making a wager. You could see people riding their bicycle across the bridge from New York to New Jersey, getting halfway, making their bet and turning around and going back.
That's hilarious.
So it's here to stay. I mean, frankly, it's always been here. Illegal wagering has, been part of our culture.
Absolutely.
But, I
Well, maybe
think it's an
as our
interesting
last
field.
And as our last question, because we only have just a few minutes left, I hear what you're saying about it being here to stay. I grew up in horse racing. I joke, but it's not really funny. I mean, horse racing paid for my house. It paid for many of the things that I have. But people are scared. Like they're scared of what gambling is going to do to sports. They're scared of what it might do to their families. They're scared, anytime you're dealing with things that I think are changing in this way and do present some level of risk to people, there's a fear factor. If you could leave them with one sentiment about what you'd like them to know about some concerns that they may have about the expansion of gaming, what would it be?
I mean, we always just kind of throw out first, bet with your head, not over your head.
Mhm.
But I think that we have a moral obligation to recognize this is an addiction. And like any other addiction, sometimes you don't realize that you're getting in trouble. And it's our responsibility. So different operators here and in other states have become really obsessed with responsible gaming. So we track your action. I mean, we know what everyone's doing. We know what they're betting. We know who you are. And even though we have techniques where there are pop-ups that give you different warnings, the books are actually now looking at your accounts and seeing if you're getting in trouble. And some of the books will even call you and say, look, you're $100 a week better, and you bet $1,000, last week on this game after you lost a few. You need help, and they talk to them. Now, you can't force someone to take help. We do have the right to exclude people, but, there are some people who don't need our help. Um, but, they're sophisticated. They understand the risks and losses. And I don't want to get into any significant stories, but I'm sure all of you have seen on TV the Mattress Mac stories, and the huge bets that he makes. But that's a business.
Right.
He is a gallery furniture. And, if you buy $3,000 worth of furniture from him and Houston wins, you get it for free. So he's kind of created, a business sense of doing this. But putting aside some of the high rollers, the people who are getting in trouble are the little people who don't have the money to lose. Like, I can't bet sports, not allowed to.
Right.
But I can bet horse racing, unless I bet against my own horse, which I'm not allowed to do. But I would tell you, I don't like to lose. So if I bet $1 or I bet 50 cents, it's just for the action. It's not trying to make money. Can't bet enough to make a difference and don't want to lose.
I
But most
understand.
people don't think that way. Most people see it as a lottery where you might have, 1 in a trillion chances of winning.
Right.
And they get in trouble. You bet a couple of races and you lose and you start doubling in order to try and, win your money back. You get to that last race and you bet an inordinate amount. It's our responsibility to track these things and try and be a counselor. You can't force someone to take help, but we do have the right to exclude them from our facility, but they're going to find someone else to make
Isn't
the
it?
bet with. And if they can't make a legal bet, they're gonna go to a bookie. Then they might
I-
get their knees broken if they don't bet.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, on that note, Dennis Drazin, it has been such a privilege spending this time with you. I'm so grateful that you shared with us extraordinary information. This was a fascinating hour that flew by. I can't believe it's over. I just want to remind everybody that Sports and Society is doing programming throughout the academic year. We encourage you to check out our website, Sports and Society at osu.edu. We have events coming up both online and in person, and then we hope that we see you again in the future. So Dennis Drazin, thank you so much for being here. Everyone else, thank you
Thank
for
you,
being
Nicole.
here, and
Thank
have
you,
a
Max.
wonderful weekend. Thank you,
Thank
Max.
you.